Laura had never imagined her mother's voice would disappear so quickly from the house. Just a week ago, she could almost hear her singing in the kitchen, the sound of her humming mixing with the smell of fresh bread. But now the house was quiet, too quiet, as if even the air refused to move. After the funeral, Laura returned home to help her father Richard. And the first thing she noticed was the empty chair near the window. That chair had always belonged to her mother. Every morning she'd sit there with her tea, watching the garden come to life. Now it stood untouched, like a reminder that something beautiful was gone forever. Richard sat at the kitchen table, staring at a cold cup of coffee. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders bent under invisible weight. Laura stood in the doorway, not knowing what to say. He had always been strong, the kind of man who fixed everything with calm patience. But this loss was something he couldn't repair. "Dad," she said softly, "you should eat something." He looked up, his eyes tired. "I'm not hungry," he murmured. "I just miss her." Those words broke something inside her. It wasn't the sadness alone, it was how he said it, like he was talking about a missing piece of himself. For the next few days, Laura stayed to help him. She cleaned the house, cooked small meals, and tried to fill the silence with small talk. But every room felt empty. Every sound echoed. Sometimes she caught him sitting in the living room, staring at nothing, lost somewhere between memory and regret. At night, Laura lay awake in her old bedroom. The air smelled like the past faded perfume, dust and quiet memories. She thought about how her mother used to call her every morning, asking if she had eaten, if she was happy, if she needed anything. She thought about how her parents had been together for over 30 years, and how her mother used to laugh when her father pretended to be serious about something small. They had built a world together, and now half of that world was gone. On the fourth night, Laura found her father sitting in the dark living room. The lamp beside him was off, and the only light came from the moon through the curtains. He didn't notice her at first. His fingers were wrapped around his wedding ring, twisting it slowly. "Dad," she whispered. He looked up, startled, and forced a small smile. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head and sat beside him. They stayed quiet for a moment. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that made her heart stop. "Laura, I can't live like this forever. Your mother wouldn't want me to." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, as if the words were heavy. "I've been going to a grief support group. There's someone there, a woman named Margaret. She lost her husband last year. We talk sometimes. She understands." Laura blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. It had only been 4 months since her mother's passing. The thought of her father talking to someone felt too sudden, almost wrong. She didn't say anything at first. She wanted to be understanding, but her heart wasn't ready. "Dad," she finally said, "isn't it too soon?" He sighed deeply. "I don't know what's right or wrong anymore. I just know the house feels too empty when you're not here. I keep hearing your mother's voice, but she's not there. I can't breathe in this silence." Laura wanted to tell him that she felt the same, that she also woke up expecting to hear her mother's footsteps in the hall. But hearing him speak about another woman made her chest tighten. She didn't want to sound selfish, yet the thought of someone new sitting in her mother's chair was unbearable. The next morning, Richard seemed lighter, as if confessing had eased something inside him. He made breakfast, asked Laura if she wanted to go for a walk, and even smiled a real smile, though small. She tried to mirror it, but her heart wasn't ready to move on. Later that day, she went up to the attic to find some photo albums. The dust floated in the sunlight as she opened the old boxes. There were pictures of her parents dancing at their wedding, holding baby Laura, decorating Christmas trees. Every picture was full of laughter. She ran her fingers over the photographs and whispered, "How could he ever forget you, Mom?" But she knew deep down her father wasn't trying to forget, was trying to survive. And maybe that was the hardest part to accept. That evening, Richard cooked dinner, something he hadn't done in weeks. Laura sat at the table, trying to act normal. Between bites, he said, "Margaret might come by next week. I thought maybe you could meet her." Her fork froze mid-air. Here, yes, he said gently. She's kind. You'll like her. Laura forced a polite smile, but inside she felt cold. She didn't want to meet this woman. She didn't want to see someone else in her mother's kitchen, washing her mother's dishes, maybe even sitting in that chair by the window. That night, Laura couldn't sleep again. She got up and went downstairs. The house was quiet, except for the sound of the clock ticking. She sat in her mother's chair and pulled one of her scarves from the nearby drawer. It still smelled faintly like lavender and soap. She held it close and whispered, "I'm trying, Mom, really trying." When morning came, she found her father humming in the kitchen. It startled her because she hadn't heard him hum in months. He looked peaceful, and for a moment, she almost felt happy for him. But then she remembered what was coming, the visit, the new woman, the new chapter she wasn't ready for. The week passed quickly. Laura worked from home, but her thoughts kept drifting to her father. She wasn't angry, just confused. How could someone be ready to open their heart again so soon? Then again, maybe grief didn't follow a schedule. Maybe love, in its strange way, found people when they were broken enough to need it. On Sunday afternoon, she stood by the window when a car pulled into the driveway. Her father went out to greet the woman who stepped out, a tall lady with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Margaret. Ski carried a small basket of flowers. A simple gesture, but it made Laura's stomach twist. From the window, Laura watched as her father's expression changed. His face softened, his posture relaxed, and for the first time since the funeral, he looked alive. She didn't know whether to cry or feel relieved. When they walked inside, Margaret greeted Laura with a kind smile. "You must be Laura," she said warmly. "Your father talks about you all the time." Laura nodded politely, trying to hide the storm inside her. They talked about simple things, the weather, the garden, how difficult loss could be. Margaret's voice was calm, comforting, and she never once tried to act like she belonged there. But still, Laura felt uneasy, as if something sacred was being quietly replaced. After dinner, Margaret left, and Richard stood by the door for a long time after she drove away. He looked thoughtful, almost hopeful. Laura stood behind him, unsure what to say. Finally, he turned and said quietly, "I know it's hard for you to see this, but she makes the loneliness a little easier." Laura nodded, forcing a small smile. She wanted to be supportive, but part of her was still clinging to the past. She wanted her mother back. She wanted their home to feel like it used to. But that wasn't possible anymore. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized something she hadn't before. Her father wasn't trying to forget her mother. He was trying to remember how to live. The difference was small, but it changed everything. Laura turned toward the window. The moonlight fell softly on the old photograph of her parents on her bedside table. Her father was smiling in that picture, holding her mother close. Maybe, she thought, love doesn't end when someone dies. It just changes shape, finding new ways to keep people alive. And as she drifted to sleep, Laura whispered into the darkness, "Maybe it's okay, Dad. Maybe it's time." The next day, she helped him water the garden. The chair near the window was still empty. But now it felt less painful, like it was waiting. Not for someone new to take it, but for peace to return to their home. That was the first morning in months that Laura heard her father hum again. And for the first time since her mother's death, she didn't ask him to stop. Margaret came over again the following weekend. This time, she brought a pie and a small vase of tulips. Laura tried to be polite, but her chest tightened every time she heard Margaret laugh. It wasn't a bad laugh. It was warm and light, but it echoed through the same kitchen where her mother used to hum. Richard looked happier than Laura had seen him in months. He asked Margaret about her garden, her late husband, her favorite books. Laura sat there quietly, smiling when necessary, though her heart wasn't in it. When Margaret left, Laura helped her father clear the table. He was humming again, and that bothered her more than she wanted to admit. "You like her," she said, not looking at him. He smiled faintly. "She's kind. I didn't think I'd ever talk to anyone like this again. Doesn't make you feel guilty?" Laura asked suddenly. Her father paused, the plate in his hand. "Every day," he said softly. But I also know your mother wouldn't want me to drown in sadness." Laura didn't answer. She understood, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. That night, she called her best friend, Daniel. They had grown up together, and he knew her family well. "He's seeing someone," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "Your dad." "Yes. A woman from his grief group. It's only been 4 months since Mom passed." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Maybe it's not about forgetting her," he said gently. "Maybe it's about finding a way to keep going." "I know," she sighed, "but it feels like she's being replaced." "She isn't," he said. "Love doesn't erase love, Laura. It just adds another chapter." His words lingered with her all night. Over the next few weeks, Margaret became a regular visitor. Sometimes she helped Richard with errands or brought food when Laura was away for work. When Laura visited, she often found them sitting in the garden, talking quietly, drinking tea. Once, she even caught them laughing over an old photo album. That laughter cut her deeper than anything else. One evening, after Margaret left, Laura noticed her father sitting at the table, staring at an old photograph of her mother. "You still keep her photo out," she said quietly. He smiled sadly. "She'll always be here. That's not going to change." That night, Laura sat on the porch trying to sort her feelings. She didn't hate Margaret. She couldn't. The woman was kind, thoughtful, and always respectful. But something inside her resisted the idea of her father moving on. Maybe it wasn't about Margaret at all. Maybe it was about the fear of letting go, of accepting that her mother was really gone. Days later, Richard invited Laura to dinner again. "Margaret and her daughter are coming," he said. "Her name's Claire. I think you'll like her." Laura hesitated, then agreed. When they arrived, Claire walked in with a bright smile. She was around Laura's age, maybe a little younger, with kind brown eyes and a calm presence. "Hi, I've heard so much about you," she said warmly, shaking Laura's hand. The evening went better than expected. Claire was funny and gentle. She didn't try too hard, didn't act like she belonged in the family already. They talked about work, about their mothers, about the strange ways people cope with loss. It felt natural until Laura noticed her father and Margaret looking at each other across the table, smiling softly. That quiet understanding between them made her heart ache again. After dinner, Claire and Laura sat on the porch while their parents washed the dishes. "This must be hard for you," Claire said softly. Laura looked at her. "Yeah, it feels strange. My mom was everything to us." "Get it?" Claire nodded. "My dad's been gone 5 years, and my mom only started seeing people last year. It's still weird sometimes. But I realized she's not trying to forget him. She's just trying to live again." Laura stared at the stars. "I guess I just didn't expect it to happen so soon." Claire smiled gently. "Grief has no rules. It's messy, but it doesn't mean love disappears." Those words stuck with Laura. For the first time, she saw Claire not as part of something replacing her family, but as someone who understood. In the following weeks, Laura found herself talking to Claire more. They texted about small things, recipes, work stress, favorite shows. There was comfort in their friendship, a sense of understanding that didn't need words. Sometimes they met for coffee or walked by the park talking about their parents, the memories they missed, the guilt they still carried. Meanwhile, Laura noticed changes in her father. He started gardening again, fixing things around the house, humming as he worked. The sadness was still there, but lighter now, softened by companionship. Laura didn't want to admit it, but Margaret had brought him back to life. One Sunday afternoon, Laura visited unannounced. She found her father and Margaret sitting by the window drinking tea, sunlight pouring in. Margaret had her hand over his, and they looked peaceful. Laura stood there quietly, unseen for a moment. It hit her then. Her father had loved deeply once, and he was loving again in a different way. It wasn't betrayal. It was survival. Later, as they all sat together, Margaret excused herself to check something in the kitchen. Laura leaned toward her father. "You really care about her, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "I do. I didn't think I'd ever feel this kind of warmth again. It's different, but it's real." Laura swallowed hard. Mom would have wanted you to be happy." He looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I hope so." After that conversation, something in Laura softened. She stopped resisting every small change. She even started bringing flowers when she visited, not for her mother's grave this time, but for the living people who were trying to heal. Claire became a bigger part of her life, too. They spent more time together, often laughing about how strange their situation was. One evening, while walking by the lake, Laura said quietly, "You know, if our parents get married, we'll technically be family." Claire smiled. Family by accident. Friends by choice. They both laughed, but deep down, Laura felt something shift. A quiet fondness. A comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. As weeks turned into months, the house began to feel like a home again. There were flowers on the table, music in the background, and the smell of food cooking. It was different from before, gentler, slower, but still filled with love. One evening after dinner, Richard gathered the courage to speak. "I want to tell you something important," he said, looking between Laura and Claire. "Margaret and I have decided to make this official. Nothing big, just a small ceremony. We don't want to replace anyone. We just want to live the rest of our lives with peace." Laura felt a rush of emotion, sadness, joy, nostalgia, all at once. She looked at her father, who had once seemed broken beyond repair, and saw hope in his eyes. That was enough. She nodded, tears forming. "I'm happy for you, Dad." That night, as she sat in her car outside, she didn't feel anger anymore. She felt relief. Her father had found someone who made him smile again. Her mother's memory wasn't gone. It lived in everything they did, in the way they still spoke about her. In the lessons she had left behind, Claire joined her outside a few minutes later, carrying 2 mugs of tea. They sat quietly, watching the stars. After a while, Claire said, "You did the right thing, you know? Letting him be happy." Laura nodded slowly. "I just wish it didn't take me so long to see it." Claire smiled softly. "Healing always takes longer than we expect." Laura looked at her, and for the first time, she truly smiled back. Maybe this is what Mom would have wanted for us to learn how to love again, even after loss. The night breeze was cool, and the sound of their parents laughing inside floated through the open window. Laura leaned back in her seat, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the same. But it was life still moving, still trying, still full of quiet, unexpected love. The day her father told her he and Margaret were getting married, Laura smiled, but inside her emotions were tangled. Part of her was proud. Proud that her father had found the strength to love again after losing the woman who had been his whole world. But another part of her felt uncertain. It's like she was standing between 2 lives. One that was gone and one that hadn't fully begun. The small wedding was planned for late spring. Nothing fancy, just a quiet ceremony in the garden behind their old house. Margaret wanted something simple, surrounded by flowers and sunlight. Laura helped with the arrangements, though her hands sometimes trembled when she folded the invitation cards. Her mother had loved the garden. She had planted every rose and daisy there. Now it was where her father would say, "I do" again. On the morning of the ceremony, Laura stood by the window of her old room, watching her father outside. He looked calm, dressed in a light gray suit, holding a small bouquet for Margaret. For a moment, she saw her mother's reflection in the glass, smiling, approving. Maybe, she thought, love doesn't die, just changes form. When Margaret walked down the small path, her eyes met Laura's. She wasn't trying to take anyone's place. She just looked grateful for love, for second chances, for being seen again. The ceremony was short. When her father said his vows, Laura noticed how his voice trembled but didn't break. When he kissed Margaret's hand, she knew he had finally found peace. After the guests left, only 4 of them remained: Richard, Margaret, Claire, and Laura. The evening light was golden, the kind her mother always loved. They sat on the porch sipping tea, watching the sky turn pink. "Thank you for being here," Richard said, looking at Laura. "I know this hasn't been easy." Laura smiled gently. "It's been harder than I thought. But I'm glad you're happy, Dad." He nodded, his eyes soft. "Your mother would have wanted this." That night, Laura stayed over. The house felt different now. Not heavy, not empty, but alive again. There was laughter coming from the kitchen, the faint sound of music playing from the radio. For the first time in over a year, she didn't feel like a visitor in a museum of memories. She felt like she was home. Later, she found herself outside with Claire. The two had grown close over the months, not just through shared grief, but through quiet understanding. Claire had a way of listening without judging, of saying little things that stayed in Laura's heart long after. They sat on the steps, both quiet, watching the stars. "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Claire said. "Seeing our parents like that?" Laura laughed softly. "Yeah, I never thought I'd see my dad smile like that again." "Me neither," Claire said. "After my dad died, my mom was a shadow for years. I used to think she'd never come back from it. But then she met your dad, and I saw her laugh again. It's like she's breathing for the first time in years." Laura turned to her, smiling faintly. "I used to be afraid of that. I thought if he moved on, it meant he was forgetting my mom. But now I think it's the opposite. Maybe love is what gives people the courage to keep living." Claire looked at her, her eyes soft. "Exactly. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It just finds new ways to exist." They sat there for a while, the night air cool and gentle. There was a comfort in the silence between them, something easy, something warm. It wasn't forced, simply was. Over the next few months, their families blended slowly. Sunday dinners became a tradition again. There were moments of awkwardness. Of course, small reminders of how different life had become, but there was also laughter. Richard would tease Margaret about her cooking. Margaret would fuss over him when he forgot his reading glasses. And Laura often caught herself smiling without realizing it. Claire became part of her everyday life. They shared morning coffee, went grocery shopping together, sometimes even watched movies late into the night. One evening, while watching an old romantic film, Claire turned to her and said, "Funny, isn't it? How people think love only happens once." Laura tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Claire smiled softly. "Love changes. It doesn't always look the same, but it still feels just as real." Those words stayed with Laura. She started noticing the little ways love showed up around her, in the way her father tucked a blanket around Margaret when she fell asleep on the couch, in how Claire always brought an extra cup of tea without being asked, and how the garden bloomed brighter that summer than it had in years. One evening, Laura found her father sitting by the window, the same spot where her mother's chair once stood. The chair was still there, untouched, but now it held a small vase of fresh flowers. "Mom would have liked these," Laura said, sitting beside him. "She would have loved them," Richard replied, smiling gently. "You know, I used to think that chair would always feel empty. But now, when I look at it, I feel peace, like she's still here somehow, just in a different way." Laura nodded. "She'd be proud of you, Dad." He looked at her with teary eyes. "And of you. You've grown stronger than I ever imagined." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of years lifting between them, as the days turned into weeks. Laura began to notice something new, something within herself. The quiet friendship she'd built with Claire had become something deeper. It wasn't sudden. It had grown gently, like the slow warmth of sunrise. There was no drama, no confusion, just a sense of peace whenever they were together. One night, as they sat by the lake, watching the reflection of the moon on the water, Clara said softly, "You know, I used to be afraid of getting close to anyone again. I thought it would mean letting go of my dad." Laura smiled. "I used to think the same about my mom." Claire looked at her. "But maybe love isn't about replacing anyone. Maybe it's about remembering how to feel again." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Laura felt something she hadn't felt since before her mother's death. Hope. The pain didn't vanish, but it softened, replaced by something quiet and kind. In the following months, life settled into a new rhythm. Margaret and Richard traveled a bit, visiting small towns and taking pictures together. The house was always filled with laughter now. Laura and Claire worked on a small project, turning Laura's mother's old garden journal into a community memory book, where people could write about the ones they had lost and how they kept their love alive. It became something beautiful, something that connected people beyond grief. When the book was finished, they sat together on the porch, flipping through the pages. "You did this," Claire said. "You turned pain into something beautiful." Laura smiled. "We did it." As the sun set, her father walked out, holding Margaret's hand. He looked at the two of them and said softly, "You girls remind me so much of your mothers, full of life, full of hope." Laura looked at them, the two people who had taught her that love could survive even the deepest pain, and she felt something inside her finally settle. That night, when the house grew quiet, Laura stepped outside and looked up at the stars. She thought of her mother, her laughter, her strength, her warmth. She thought of her father, who had dared to love again. She thought of Claire, whose kindness had become her anchor. And she realized something simple but powerful. Love doesn't end when someone leaves. It stays in the spaces they once filled, in the hearts they touched, in the courage they leave behind. Life had changed. Yes, but not in a way that erased the past. It had expanded to hold more love, more light, more understanding. Laura closed her eyes, smiled at the sky, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for teaching me how to love." Even after goodbye, the night breeze brushed against her face, gentle and warm. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt whole. Her story, their story, wasn't one of endings. It was one of beginnings, of rediscovery, of quiet second chances that life sometimes gives when we least expect them. And as the moon rose higher, Laura knew one thing for sure. Her mother's love hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed shape, finding new ways to shine through the people she left behind.